From a dying cop making one final call to his best friend, to a police captain watching his own department hand a serial killer the keys to the evidence locker, this isn't just a story about silence. Because Captain Matthews didn't miss all the signs, he might have known every single one. Starting with the suicide that covered up a monster. The foundation of Captain Matthews' knowledge about Dexter began with a devastating phone call that would haunt him for years to come. On the day before Harry Morgan's suicide, Harry called Matthews and made a cryptic request to watch over Dexter and his sister Deborah. This was the desperate plea of a dying man who carried an unbearable secret. Harry Morgan was one of the most respected officers in Miami Metro service, often considered a hero, and Thomas Matthews was his closest friend. Their partnership went beyond professional boundaries. They had worked together for years, shared the dangers of police work, and Matthews had witnessed Harry's dedication to justice firsthand. When Harry made that final phone call, Matthews knew that something was terribly wrong, but he couldn't have imagined the full scope of what Harry was hiding. The truth was that Harry had discovered Dexter dismembering his victim, Juan Rhinus, just 3 days earlier, and the horror of seeing his work firsthand. The proud way Dexter displayed the dismembered body had shattered Harry completely. Harry realized that his training had created a monster, and the guilt became unbearable. But in that final conversation with Matthews, Harry's request to watch over his children carried deeper implications than Matthew initially understood. Harry committed suicide by overdosing on his heart medication, and Matthews made the crucial decision to hide the autopsy report and cover up the true cause of death. He told Dexter and Deborah and told them that Harry had died of heart disease, believing that he was protecting them from additional trauma. But this cover-up decision reveals something significant. Matthew was willing to falsify official police records based solely on Harry's final request. For Matthew to take such an enormous professional and legal risk suggests that he suspected that there was more to Harry's request than simple paternal concern. A seasoned police captain doesn't falsify death records without understanding the gravity of what he's covering up. The most telling aspect of this incident is that Harry specifically asked Matthews to watch over Dexter, not just Deborah. I think Matthews realized even then that Harry's suicide was about something far more personal and dangerous involving Dexter specifically. But Matthews inherited a problem that would soon start showing its true nature. As captain of Miami Metro Homicide, Matthews had oversight of all department operations, including access to case files, evidence storage, and computer databases. What he witnessed over the years was a pattern of behavior from Dexter Morgan that should have been suspicious for any vigilant police administrator. Dexter worked as a blood spatter analyst in forensics department, but his activities went far beyond what his job required. Throughout his tenure at Miami Metro, Dexter consistently showed unusual interest in old cases, cold files, and suspects who had escaped justice through legal technicalities. While other forensic technicians focused on current active investigations, Dexter routinely accessed files on closed cases involving killers who had been released or acquitted. The forensics department utilized police databases that provided extensive information, including names, pictures, addresses, and criminal histories. Dexter's position gave him legitimate access to these systems, but his usage patterns were far from typical. He regularly researched individuals who weren't connected to any active cases he was assigned to, often spending significant time reviewing files on murders that had been officially closed. What made this particularly suspicious was the timing and frequency of Dexter's research activities. He often accessed these files during off hours or between cases, suggesting personal rather than professional interests. The subjects of his research consistently involved murderers who had evaded conviction, creating a clear pattern that any observant supervisor would notice. But what really should have caught Matthew's attention was Dexter's uncanny psychological insights during investigations. Throughout Dexter's career at Miami Metro, Matthews witnessed something that should have raised serious questions. A forensic analyst who consistently demonstrated remarkable insight into killers' psychology and methods. While other technicians focused on the scientific analysis of evidence, Dexter regularly provided investigative breakthroughs that went far beyond his job description. Matthew observed Dexter during multiple major cases, watching as he provided detailed theories about how the killers thought, what drove them to kill, and how they selected their victims. This level of psychological insight was unusual for a forensic technician, whose training typically focused on physical evidence rather than criminal psychology. What made these insights particularly suspicious was their accuracy. Dexter's theories about killer behavior were consistently proven correct, allowing detectives to anticipate suspects' actions and ultimately solve cases. His understanding of criminal methodology was so precise that it often seemed like he was speaking from personal experience rather than academic knowledge. I believe that Matthew noticed these patterns early in Dexter's career, but chose to interpret them as enthusiasm for justice rather than something more sinister. If you're already connecting the dots, go ahead and subscribe, because the further this goes, the harder it gets to pretend that Matthews didn't see what was right in front of him. The convenience of Dexter's insights would prove costly, because this was an academic curiosity, it was inside knowledge from someone living the psychology he was analyzing. The most damning evidence of Captain Matthews' complicity came during the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, when he found himself in an extraordinary position of watching Dexter literally investigate himself. This created a parallel investigation scenario that should have been impossible to miss for any competent police administrator. Yet Matthews not only allowed it to continue, but actively facilitated it. When 30-plus dismembered bodies were discovered in Miami's harbor, Matthews helped establish the FBI task force led by Special Agent Frank Lundy to hunt the killer dubbed the Bay Harbor Butcher. What happened next should have triggered immediate suspicion from any observant supervisor. Matthew witnessed Dexter being assigned as the primary forensic analyst for the biggest serial killer investigation in Miami Metro's history. This meant that Dexter was responsible for analyzing evidence, processing crime scenes, and providing expert testimony about a killer whose methods he knew intimately, because he was that killer. The investigation reached a critical turning point when James Doak stole Dexter's blood slide collection and the FBI discovered the slides in Doak's car. At this moment, Matthew made a decision that would prove crucial. He enforced an in-house forensic investigation and made Dexter the lead technician in analyzing the slides. Matthews personally presented Dexter with the blood slide box alongside Lundy, watching as Dexter calmly examined evidence of his own crimes. The slides contained blood samples from 46 victims, 18 of which matched the recovered bodies. Dexter was ordered to match the blood slides to the victims, essentially asking him to catalog his own murders for the FBI. What made this even more suspicious was Matthews' demeanor during this process. He showed no signs of finding it strange that their most cautious and precise forensic specialist was being asked to analyze evidence that would definitely prove the guilt of a colleague. Matthew treated the situation as a routine police work rather than the extraordinary conflict of interest it represented. Whether Matthew's decision was intentionally protective or simply negligent remains unclear, but either explanation suggests concerning judgment. What's certain is that Matthews made a decision that gave the real Bay Harbor Butcher complete control over the forensic analysis of his own crimes. The pattern of convenient deaths would continue to mount, but Matthews would face his biggest test when someone finally started connecting the dots years later. Matthews knew about the Morgan family trauma long before it became relevant to any case. Dexter's unusually personal investment in catching a serial killer who seemed to be specifically targeting him. The ice truck killer case revealed disturbing parallels that Matthew couldn't have missed. Both Dexter and the killer had intimate knowledge of crime scene methodology. Both showed sophisticated understanding of police procedures, and both seemed to be playing an elaborate psychological game with each other rather than the typical cat and mouse dynamic between law enforcement and criminals. When Brian Moser was revealed as the ice truck killer, Matthews learned that Dexter's biological brother had become a serial killer after experiencing the same childhood trauma. This revelation should have triggered immediate psychological evaluation and supervision for Dexter. Instead, Matthews allowed him to continue working cases without any additional oversight or counseling requirements. The statistical improbability of two brothers from the same traumatic background ending up on opposite sides of a serial killer investigation, one as the killer and one as the forensic expert hunting him, should have been suspicious to any competent administrator. Matthews knew about Dexter's childhood trauma, knew about Brian's crimes, and yet never questioned whether Dexter might have been similarly affected by their shared experiences. Most telling was Dexter's presence during both major confrontations with Brian. Matthews witnessed how Dexter happened to be in the right place at the right time to stop his brother, despite having no official reason to be conducting field investigation work as a forensic analyst. I think Matthews recognized that the ice truck killer connection was too personal and too convenient to be coincidental, but chose to see Dexter as the hero who stopped his killer brother rather than questioning what other similarities that they might share. This family connection would prove to be just the beginning of a pattern of personal investments that no forensic analyst should have had. Captain Matthews had worked alongside Sergeant James Doakes for years and knew his background, methods, and psychological profile better than almost anyone. When the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation pointed towards Doakes as the prime suspect, Matthews should have immediately recognized that the killer methodology was completely inconsistent with everything he knew about the decorated war veteran. James Doakes was a former Army Ranger who had served with the elite 75th Rangers Regiment Regimental Reconnaissance Detachment. His military training had instilled in him specific combat methodologies, tactical precision, and operational discipline that would be nearly impossible to abandon in civilian life. Doakes had earned the nickname Sane James during his military service for the ability to detect the mentally unhinged, demonstrating exceptional psychological insight and tactical awareness. The Bay Harbor Butcher's kills were characterized by methodical dismemberment, careful body disposal in specific ocean currents, and the collection of blood slides as trophies. This ritualistic approach suggested someone with deep psychological compulsions and a need for personal connection to each victim. Dokes, with his military background, would have favored quick, efficient eliminations without the time-consuming ritual elements. Moreover, the Bay Harbor Butcher's pattern of target selection was based on personal moral judgments about their crimes and their escape from justice. Dokes, while having a strong sense of justice, operated within established military and police protocols, not personal vigilante philosophies. Additionally, the forensic evidence suggested someone with extensive knowledge of blood spatter analysis and crime scene investigation, technical forensic knowledge that Dokes, despite being an expert detective, simply didn't possess. Matthews knew that Dokes had killed specific targets during his military black operations, but these were mission-based eliminations of confirmed enemy combatants, not the psychological gratification killings that characterized the Butcher. The difference between a soldier following orders and a serial killer feeding psychological compulsions should have been obvious to any experienced law enforcement administrator. I think that Matthews recognized these inconsistencies, but felt pressured by the mounting evidence that had been planted against Dokes. Dokes didn't match the profile, but Dexter did, and Matthews had the training to spot it. Drop a comment. Do you think that Matthews really believed that Dokes was guilty, or was he just protecting the wrong guy? Matthews' failure to voice these concerns publicly represented either willful blindness or a conscious decision to allow an innocent man to take the blame for crimes that clearly didn't match his profile. Captain Matthews' knowledge of Dexter's true nature became undeniable during the Trinity killer investigation, when a series of coincidences should have made it impossible to ignore that Dexter was far more involved than any forensic analyst should have been. What Matthews witnessed during this investigation was extraordinary. Dexter somehow managed to get closer to the Trinity killer than the entire FBI task force, the Miami Metro detectives, or even the legendary Frank Lundy, who had been hunting Trinity for 15 years. The most suspicious aspect was how intimately familiar Dexter became with Trinity's methods and psychology, demonstrating detailed knowledge that suggests someone who had studied Trinity far more closely than his job required. But what should have been the worst was Rita's murder. When Trinity killed Rita Morgan, it didn't fit his normal modus operandi, and the timing was too convenient. Trinity somehow discovered Dexter's identity and home address just as Dexter was closing in on him. This suggested a much more personal connection between the two killers than would be expected from a routine forensic investigation. Over his years as captain and later deputy chief, Matthews would have also witnessed a disturbing pattern that should have been seriously concerning about Dexter's involvement in cases. Throughout seasons 1 through 6, a suspicious number of suspects in Dexter's investigations died before they could stand trial or reveal information that might implicate him. Matthews was present during the ice truck killer case when Neil Perry was arrested as a false suspect and then later witnessed the dramatic conclusion with Brian Moser's death. He oversaw the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation where the prime suspect, James Dokes, died in an explosion at a remote cabin. During the Trinity killer case, Arthur Mitchell was found dead after an apparent confrontation. The pattern became even more apparent in subsequent cases. Suspects would be identified, pursued by Miami Metro with Dexter's forensic expertise guiding the investigation, and then mysteriously turn up dead before they could be properly interrogated or tried. As a career law enforcement officer, Matthews understood that while dangerous suspects sometimes died during apprehension, the frequency of these deaths in cases where Dexter provided forensic analysis was statistically improbable. I think Matthews was too career-focused to dig too deeply into something that was making his department look efficient, but the pattern was undeniable for anyone actually paying attention. The blood slide discovery would force Matthews to confront the possibility that all these convenient deaths weren't coincidental at all. Matthews' reluctance to investigate Dexter wasn't just about loyalty to Harry Morgan, it was about protecting his own career advancement. Throughout his tenure as captain and later deputy chief, Matthews built his professional reputation on the success of high-profile case closures that consistently involved Dexter's crucial contributions. The Bay Harbor Butcher case closure became the cornerstone of Matthews' campaign for deputy chief. Having the forensic expert who caught the most notorious serial killer in Miami's history working in his department was an enormous professional asset. Matthew used this success to promote himself within the department hierarchy, making Dexter's continued reputation essential to his own career prospects. What made this particularly problematic was how Matthews allowed Dexter unprecedented freedom to work cases outside his jurisdiction and job description. While other forensic staff were limited to laboratory analysis, Dexter was giving access to crime scenes, evidence storage, and investigative resources typically reserved for detectives. Matthews signed off on overtime requests for Dexter's research activities and approved his attendance at court hearings and crime scene investigations that had nothing to do with blood spatter analysis. Matthews also witnessed the Miguel Prado situation, where the respected assistant district attorney was found murdered after developing a close working relationship with Dexter. The timing was suspicious. Prado had been investigating cases that overlap with Dexter's forensic work, and his death eliminated someone who had gained unusual insight into Dexter's methods and psychology. The Jordan Chase case represented another example of Matthews benefiting from Dexter's breakthroughs while ignoring obvious red flags. When a complex network of killers was systematically eliminated before they could reveal the full scope of their crimes, Matthews celebrated the case closure without questioning how one forensic analyst had managed to uncover connections that escaped an entire task force. Each successful case closure enhanced Matthews' reputation and advanced prospects, creating a financial incentive to avoid scrutinizing the methods that produced such impressive results. His department clearance rates were among the highest in the state, largely due to cases where Dexter provided crucial insights that led to quick resolutions. I believe that Matthews understood that investigating Dexter too closely would jeopardize not just individual cases, but his entire career trajectory, which had been built on the foundation of Dexter's contributions to high-profile investigations. The professional benefits of having Dexter in his department far outweighed any moral concerns on how those results were achieved, because if you look deeper into it, there were several witness protection failures and missing persons. Matthews' knowledge of Dexter's activities extended beyond solved cases to encompass a disturbing pattern of witness disappearances and informant deaths that consistently benefited ongoing investigations. As deputy chief, Matthews had oversight of witness protection protocols and confidential informant management, giving him access to information that revealed how often potential witnesses vanished just before they could provide testimony that might complicate case closures. Throughout Dexter's tenure at Miami Metro, several key witnesses in major investigations died under suspicious circumstances before they could testify. These weren't random street crimes or obvious retaliation killings. They were careful eliminations that removed specific individuals who possessed information that could have exposed the true scope of various criminal enterprises. The Little Chino case exemplified this pattern. Jorge Orozco, known as Lil Chino, was a drug dealer who had information about police corruption and protection rackets within Miami Metro. After Dexter processed the crime scene where Little Chino's girlfriend was murdered, Chino himself disappeared without a trace. His body was never found, but Matthews signed off on presuming him dead, allowing the corruption investigation to die with him. Matthews oversaw the Jeremy Downs case, where a suspected child killer was found dead in a cell before he could reveal information about a larger pedophile network. Dexter had been the primary forensics analyst on Downs' original case, and had unusual access to evidence that suggested connections to other suspects who were never investigated after Downs' convenient death. The most telling pattern involved confidential informants who had provided information about killers that Dexter later investigated. These informants would agree to cooperate with police, provide initial statements that help identify suspects, and then disappear before they could provide follow-up testimony or testify at trial. Matthews processed several missing person reports for informants who had worked with cases involving Dexter's forensic analysis. Matthews also had access to federal databases that tracked witness protection program participants. Several individuals who had requested protection after providing information about violent criminals later left the program voluntarily, claiming they no longer feel threatened. These departures consistently occurred after Dexter had gained access to their case files through his forensic work. The domestic violence shelter database showed another suspicious pattern. Women who had escaped abusive relationships and provide testimony against their attackers would sometimes return to their abusers voluntarily, often just before major court proceedings. In several cases, these women later died in what appeared to be domestic violence incidents, but Dexter had been involved in processing evidence from their original assault cases. What made these patterns particularly damning was the consistency across different types of cases and different time periods. Matthews witnessed the same sequence repeatedly. Witnesses would cooperate initially, and Dexter would gain access to their information through legitimate forensic work, and then the witness would either disappear or die before they could provide testimony that might complicate case closures. I believe that Matthews recognized that these disappearances were too convenient and too consistent to be coincidental, but chose to interpret them as signs of effective law enforcement rather than evidence of systematic witness elimination. The alternative, acknowledging that someone within his department was systematically eliminating potential witnesses, would have required an investigation that could have also destroyed the reputation that he had spent decades building. And if that wasn't bad enough, there was also the bloodslide discovery and boat interrogation. The moment that should have confirmed Matthews' suspicions came in Season 7 when Captain Maria LaGuerta discovered a bloodslide at Travis Marshall's crime scene. This discovery represented the smoking gun that connected Dexter to the Bay Harbor Butcher case, and Matthews' reaction revealed everything about what he truly knew. After confirming from a private lab that the blood on the slide belonged to Travis Marshall, LaGuerta came to believe that James Dokes was innocent and that the real Bay Harbor Butcher may still have been active. She brought this evidence to Matthews, knowing that during the Bay Harbor Butcher case, only the serial killer took blood slide as trophies. Matthews' initial response was to dismiss LaGuerta's theory entirely, mockingly accusing her of drinking and stating Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher. End of story. But his resistance wasn't the reaction of someone hearing this theory for the first time. It was the response of someone trying to shut down an investigation that threatened to expose something he already knew. When Matthews eventually agreed to help LaGuerta investigate, but only after she promised to get his job back, he invited Dexter to his boat for what would become the most revealing conversation in the series. This wasn't a genuine interrogation. It was a warning disguised as questioning. Matthews systematically laid out everything LaGuerta knew. She knows your life story, your childhood, what you saw in that cargo container. Most people that screw them up for life. I mean, your brother went through the same thing you did and look what happened to him. This wasn't how innocent supervisors question employees. This was how accomplices share intelligence. Matthews was essentially briefing Dexter on the scope of the investigation against him, giving him every piece of information he needed to craft an effective defense. When Dexter realized he was being interrogated, he quickly made up a story about a non-existent boat owned by Dokes that he docked at the Coral Cove Marina. Matthews immediately accepted this explanation despite its obvious flaws. An experienced investigator would have pressed for details, asked for documentation, or at least expressed skepticism about such a convenient revelation. Instead, Matthews went straight to LaGuerta with Dexter's story and defended it when she expressed doubt. When they actually found the boat's storage facility with planted evidence, trash bags, plastic wraps, knives, and Dokes' fingerprint, Matthews' behavior during the discovery was crucial. When LaGuerta pointed out that Dexter is a forensic expert who has the skill to plant such evidence, Matthews told her to let it go, rather than pursuing this obvious possibility. I think this boat conversations was Matthews' way of managing the situation while maintaining plausible deniability. He could claim he was investigating while actually facilitating Dexter's cover-up. Now, if that boat conversation felt less like an interrogation and more like a strategy meeting, you're not alone. Hit the like if Matthews crossed the line from supervisor to silent accomplice. At this point, Matthews was drawing the map for Dexter to escape justice, and that's very apparent when you look at LaGuerta's murder and Matthews' final choice. The ultimate proof of Matthews' complicity came in his reaction to LaGuerta's death and his role in covering up what was obviously Dexter's final solution to the investigation problem. When faced with the choice between justice and protecting the Morgan family, Matthews chose family loyalty over his oath as a law enforcement officer. LaGuerta's investigation had reached a critical point where she possessed GPS tracking warrants that would have proven both Dexter and Deborah's involvement in the Travis Marshall murder and church fire. She had refused to accept the planted evidence at the boat's storage facility and continued building her case against Dexter as the Bay Harbor Butcher. LaGuerta's death, staged to look like a mutual shooting with Hector Estrada, should have been immediately suspicious for any competent investigator. The timing was too convenient, coming just as her investigation was about to expose Dexter. The circumstances were too neat, with both the investigator and her prime suspect's revenge target dying simultaneously in what appeared to be a planned confrontation. Matthews' response to this coincidence revealed everything about his true loyalties. At LaGuerta's memorial service, Matthews presented a bench made in honor of Maria LaGuerta and her service to Miami, playing the role of a grieving colleague while knowing the truth about her death. More importantly, after LaGuerta's death, Angel Batista went through her belongings and found the warrants that she had kept during her investigation of Dexter and Deborah. He ripped up the warrants that could have otherwise implicated the two in the murder of Travis Marshall. This destruction of evidence happened under Matthews' watch as deputy chief, and his failure to preserve or investigate these materials was a clear obstruction of justice. Matthew had spent an entire season helping LaGuerta investigate Dexter, supposedly to clear Dokes' name and restore his own pension. But when LaGuerta died just as she was about to expose the truth, Matthews made no effort to continue her work or honor her sacrifice. Instead, he allowed crucial evidence to be destroyed and the investigation to die with her. The fact that Matthews continued working with Dexter and Deborah after LaGuerta's suspicious death, while knowing about her investigation and the evidence she gathered, proves that he was an active participant in the cover-up rather than an unknowing supervisor. I believe that this final act sealed Matthews' transformation from a compromised supervisor into a full accomplice, choosing family loyalty over justice in the most definitive way possible. Captain Matthews didn't need a confession to know what Dexter was. He had the motive, the patterns, and the chance to stop it all. But every time he looked the other way, whether it was out of loyalty, fear, or guilt, it doesn't matter. What matters is he helped the Bay Harbor Butcher stay hidden right in the heart of Miami Metro. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe with notifications turned on, and I'll see you in the next video about Dexter's dumbest mistakes.